Hello, Helen. I just want to thank you once again for agreeing to do this podcast with me. I know it's been, I think, one of our projects we wanted to do together, just because I feel like we always vibe and we always share our like professional experiences and kind of how I think we even wish like we were mentored in a way that we could either overcome them or have just better strategies. And we're always thinking about how do we tell our students, right, that this is okay, that this is normal. So definitely want to thank you for joining me in today's podcast about imposter syndrome. And I feel like we both have heard so many things about imposter syndrome, and we've experienced it. But before we begin and kind of dive into what it is, how we've defined it as first-gen professionals, I do want to first go over kind of like what this podcast is about, and then we're going to dive into you introducing yourself. So for everyone who's listening, this is our first gen podcast, and this is the first time the Career Development Center is doing anything like this. And this podcast really is dedicated to all of you who are going to become first generation professionals. So this mini series is going to touch on topics that are very well known for first-gen professionals and first-gen students. So again, today we're going to talk about imposter syndrome, and I do want to introduce Helen. So Helen, please take it away, introduce yourself to all our listeners and kind of like what you do on our campus.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Rosa. So as Rosa mentioned, my name is Helen Barriere. I currently work as a program manager at Cal State Long Beach for HSI STEM. And a little bit about myself, I grew up in South Central LA, so not too far from Cal State Long Beach. Out of high school, I went straight to a UC. I went to UC San Diego for about 2 years, and it wasn't really the campus for me. Then I went to El Camino College, and I thought I was going to go back to San Diego, but in redefining who I was as a student and what my purpose was, and even what major I was exploring, I decided that Cal State Northridge was going to be the campus for me. And so I transferred there, and then I finished. And in my spare time, what I like to do for fun, it really depends on the mood I'm in. So sometimes I make jewelry, sometimes I make TikTok videos, and my goal for this year is to read 80 books. And I am a little behind, so I'm currently working on that as we speak.
And that's super fun. I mean, I was an English major, so to hear that you have like, you want to reach 80 books, that is amazing. And just for our listeners to know, I mean, we're colleagues, but we're also good friends. We met in grad school. We were in the SDHE program, the Student Development and Higher Ed program, and we always clicked. So I couldn't think of a better person to join me in this topic that I think we all experience at some point. Either you're a student, and Helen, definitely if you wanted to like chime in if any of your experiences kind of resonate with what I'm about to share. But I know that even in student life, like you know, you're in the classroom and you often think like, oh my goodness, this class is not for me. This may not be my major because everybody else is doing so much better than I am, or everybody's clicking better than I am with the material. And so we tend to think about these thoughts and kind of like actually, you know, doubt ourselves. And so the imposter syndrome, I think, just resonates so much with our students, but I think also with ourselves too. But I definitely want to open up the question to you and kind of ask you, like, one, how did you, experience imposter syndrome? What was that like for you? And like, what kind of memories actually come up when you hear about it and kind of like what it is?
So we talked about this earlier. I feel that imposter syndrome really masks itself in a lot of different ways, where it manifests itself as sometimes not feeling like we're understanding the material and then feeling everybody else is understanding the material. I know that I struggled in college. It took me a while to find myself and really redefining and understanding like what student was I and like why was I going off track. I probably had a lot of those imposter syndrome moments at UCSD. However, the one time that I wanted to share, or that I've shared with you before, where I know for sure it was imposter syndrome, was my first job offer. As I had shared in a video before, it took me 9 months to find a full-time position after having graduated with my bachelor's degree. I graduated in a recession. When I say that companies and organizations were trying to hire people with a lot of experience for almost no money, that is what it felt like, interview after interview after interview. And mind you, it took me maybe 7 to 6 months to even start getting interviews that were related to my field, that were related to my area of expertise. So I started working at a nonprofit, but in that, when they interviewed me, and then they interviewed me or emailed to tell me that they were offering me the position, I asked them if they had the right Helen, which seems like a really odd question, but I think by that point I was so overwhelmed and sometimes even sad that I felt like, what is wrong with me that I'm not finding a job, knowing what type of person I am, how I really like to work with people. I have a lot of experience and I give my positions, my projects, my all a lot of the time. And so I'm sure that was a really odd question for them to get. And they responded, yes, we have the right Helen. And I don't even know that they would have interviewed another Helen, but that was one of the questions that I had. And I feel like I'm able to identify that so clearly because of the disconnect, right? Of like, I had this degree, I worked really hard, I interviewed, and I felt the interview, even though I was really nervous, went well. And then they offered me a position. But by that point, I was so in awe and it was so surreal because I'm like, I've been looking forever. When is this ever going to happen to me? That's the first time I can really pinpoint it. But thinking back, definitely the feelings of wanting to give up, because I wanted to give up at the undergraduate level and at the graduate level. I also feel those are probably, real forms of imposter syndrome. And even with the students that I work with, students that excel and do amazing, and I would assume they don't have imposter syndrome, they do, because we'll have conversations that will seem like they're not connected. But then when I ask them, where's that feeling coming from? And they end up telling me that they have to work double to feel like they're as equal as someone that does half the work. And sometimes it has to do with what we look like, what, our ethnicity, our, perceived race. And then sometimes it has to do with our gender. And I work with STEM students, so I see this all the time. And it's definitely something that I've had to learn how to talk myself through. And then hopefully when students do open up with me, I can help them talk through that as well and feel a little more comfortable and understand that they do matter, right? That they are here, they got selected. This isn't a necessarily easy campus to get into. And when you're here, if you don't feel like you belong, then you probably will not have the greatest academic journey. And that's what I was feeling my first 2 years of college. And that completely changed, my third, fourth, fifth, and sixth year.
And that's like, I mean, you have such a wealth of not only like knowledge and experience, but also I think wisdom in you, like just to look back retrospectively and how this really kind of affected you and how you're seeing it with our students here, right? And I have to say they're very lucky to have you, because I would have loved to have someone like you when I was in college and also when I was going through my kind of moments of imposter syndrome. But I think also something that you brought to light that I'm like, this makes total sense. And I feel like we all go through this at some point in our lives is in the interview process, right? At the Career Development Center, we always, support our students through our mock interviews. And we have students who, could be alumni, could be students who have been trying and doing all these interviews with folks, and they still feel like there's something wrong with them, and they end up in this moment of like, I don't think this is for me anymore. And this whole kind of like worry about like, what do I say to my folks? Like, what do I say to my friends? Like, I don't know how to process this anymore. And so when you said like, it took you 9 months, right? Was it 9 months, Helen? 9 months to find a job. And like, you just remind me of our students now who are searching for jobs and how it could feel like, yes, this is an eternity. What's going on? Is there something that I'm not saying, something that I don't have, but also the recognition that our students have done all the work. They're part of this great institution and they've earned their place, like you said. So I definitely wanted to mention that and kind of like, let our listeners know, like, hey, if this sounds like you're not alone. I think that's one of the things that I tend to tell students too. I'm like, hey, you're not alone in this. It's something that, I think a lot of our students feel like it's only me. And I think growing up, right, where we feel like, yeah, you have to be a trailblazer, right? That's being a first gen. You're a trailblazer. You have to figure things out, and if you don't, right, you have to find a way in some way, shape, or form, right? But you touched on so many important things, and definitely I wanted to share with you and our listeners. I think my first recognition of the imposter syndrome was when I was offered the position as career counselor. I was still in my grad program, so Helen and we remember that year, second year in grad school. It was tough, and then I was also working full time, and I remember still thinking this is going to be tough. I need to prove myself. I need to earn my place. When in reality, when I was offered the position, that was my supervisor saying, we hired you because of the talent that you have, and we feel like you're going to make a great counselor here in our center. But why did these ideas of I'm not going to be able to do it, or I have to prove myself, I don't have these years of experience in comparison to my colleagues, they still came in, and it was a flood of those ideas that sometimes would keep me up at night and saying, I'm going to be nervous just to wake up and enter into the office again. And it wasn't necessarily, again, people in the office that were making me feel uncomfortable. It was my own thought process. But with that said, I mean, Helen, do you feel like you have any tips? I know you mentioned that you talk through with some of our students when they're having these ideas, or you're kind of seeing that this could be something that they're thinking about and they're struggling with. Do you have any tips or things that you can think of that you feel like it has helped you or your students kind of overcome these moments?
So I have a lot, but I will condense it for the sake of this podcast and everyone's time. The first one that I really want to share is that I definitely know that I didn't use my resources. And I know that's one of those where, I graduated a while back, so the communication wasn't as constant. I do recall being in one class and they said, go to the Career Center, and I didn't actually go there. I did go to the career fair on campus, and that's maybe gave me a lead to one interview, but I didn't get that position. So I actually interviewed for Subway. That's another story for another day. But use your resources. Really go to the centers. They're here on campus for you. The second one that I would say is have a person, whether it's a peer or a staff member or a faculty member, that you feel comfortable sharing what's happening in your life. Be careful not to overburden another peer, because they're also going through their things, and also not having expectations of a faculty staff member or a staff member to be able to solve your problems. It's just more, it can be a simple question. Take me, for example, you can email me and say, Helen, I'm not getting interviews. Do you think maybe you can look at my resume? Or maybe, do you have some time to help me job search? And of course, those are things, again, that the Career Development Center can and does do. And I definitely promote that as much as possible. If you're in any of my classes or in any of my programs, that is the first place I will send a student to. But sometimes you need someone that's actually in your field or in your major that you can share those things with. Also, just try to have open conversations with the people around you. I'm sure it was very odd for my parents to not see that I would, not get interviews or things like that. And sometimes their comments were helpful, but sometimes they weren't. I had a cousin that I really confided in, and she's like, if you need to come cry at my apartment, I will give you the key, just come pick it up. And I needed to hear that, because although I never took her up on her offer, I knew that I could go and do that, because there were days where I just cried. because I really felt like, why am I not good enough? After having volunteered, after like bringing back my GPA to be on presidents and dean's lists, you know, my last couple of years, it was really hard. And so that really builds, right, to the imposter syndrome. But monitoring your conversations is another tip that I will have. Like, if you're saying you're not good enough, where's that coming from? And do you have someone that you can talk to talk through that? You know, we have CAPS, you know, you may have access to other counseling resources. It may seem trivial and like, why would I go to a counseling center for that? But the reality is that we really need to learn better tools to be able to process our own emotions, and talking to somebody, a professional in that case, could help us really develop some strong tools that we may not need counseling for 5 years, but they help us through that, you know, time period.
And all amazing tips. And Helen, you are what we call in our Career Development Center our career champion. We have so many on campus that, you know, advocate for our center and our services, but I think we also value how you also are that champion and stepping in and helping our students when, as we're, you know, looking at the entire campus too. And I love your tips. I think I've benefited of you being my peer and actually hearing me when I was in doubt. So I love that tip of just like confiding, but also seeking that help, right? And I think that is so true of being a first gen. We are so used to being trailblazers, and sometimes we think that means that we have to do it by ourselves. But you're right. It takes a community, and we are a community of first gen college students, and we're now going to become first gen professionals in our fields. We're going to, you know, some of our students who are listening to our podcast, they're going to be the first to get a full-time job ever. And some might be, you know, going right into the field. Some are going to be our master students going into the field. So all these thoughts, right? I love how you kind of concluded with like, where is this thought coming from, right? And I feel like you've either asked that like intentionally in some of the conversations we've had, or you've built great questions to kind of ask that of me, and I've always appreciated that. And that's why I thought you're going to be perfect for this podcast. But with that said, thank you so much, Helen, for your tips for our students, for our listeners. You know, again, the Career Development Center is here for all those career aspects, but I think really great resources that Helen, you mentioned, CAPS, our resources on campus, our tutoring centers, the Graduate Studies Resource Center. There's just so many people out there that want to see us triumph and be part of that success for our communities, that we just need to access them. So I want to thank you again so much. It's always so much fun to hear, you know, your journey, but also listen into that wisdom that you've gained and fostered in all these years in supporting not just our students, but like our communities as well. So with that said, we are going to end our podcast. Please feel free to comment, add questions. Our center loves to interact with all of you. So if you want more tips, resources, anything that you might need around this topic, just feel free to comment, and we'd be more than happy to follow up. So until next time, thanks all for listening.
Bye.
Bye.